Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And what a lovely story this is, and we're going to find out where this leads. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and by all means go and get yourself something lovely to drink, because you deserve to unwind and relax. And let's get started with part 3 of our story tonight. Ma'am, when I made my vows before God, I said that in sickness and health I would stay by Walter's side. I can't leave him like that. I've made a promise to God and to myself. And despite everything, I do love him. I depend on him financially, of course I do, especially for the expense of school fees and the daily necessities of life. But I just absolutely cannot and will not divorce him. But of course you can divorce him, love. These are extenuating circumstances, can't you see? Walter is abusing you. Not physically, of course, but by willfully ignoring you and the kids. I mean, he might as well be a boarder in your home, paying rent every month, because he's absolutely not involved in your life. Ma'am, don't you get it? I don't want to divorce Walter. We share a bed together every night. We still love each other. I love him. Why don't you get that? More fool you, my mother said, sounding completely exasperated with me. I hope you will come to your senses, love. Think about what we've discussed very carefully, and if you change your mind, I'll be on to my solicitors pronto. It's so good to see you, said Julie Holland, looking at me through bright blue eyes as I approached her. Isn't it a magnificent day? It sure is, I said. You can see spring is on its way, which is why I've been attending to my roses over there. So I see, said Julie appreciatively. By the way, just so you know, I bumped into your husband about 2 days ago, I think it was. He was on his way to the corner shop in town to get some milk for his coffee. Apparently he can't stand it black. We ended up having quite a long, sociable chat, I have to say. This was a revelation. I was surprised to hear this, because I've never known my husband to be a great communicator at the best of times, and my husband certainly hadn't mentioned having a long chat with Julie Holland of all people. Oh, yes, don't look so surprised, dear, Julie chuckled. We talked for some time, actually. I was telling Walter that he needed to spend more time with you and the children. Go on a holiday somewhere, perhaps. You told him that? I asked, my mouth dropping wide open. What did he have to say about that? Oh, he agreed wholeheartedly. He thought I was absolutely right that he needed to spend some more time with you and the kids. He needed to make you all a priority in his life. That's why I called you over, actually. I've been visiting a dying patient of mine at the hospice who mentioned he's got several cabins on the Canadian border, well, close to the Canadian border to be more precise, that he and his wife let out to holiday makers. It's a good income earner, I believe, for a retired couple like themselves, because people pay excellent money for their bookings 2 years in advance, I believe it is. But recently they had a cancellation on one of the beautiful cabins on the first 3 weeks of the summer holidays, and one is going spare. Now, if you snap it up, he won't charge you a bean for it. I told him I was certain your family would take it, as after all, Walter mentioned that you and the family haven't been on a holiday for a long time. So if I were you, my dear, word of advice, I wouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth like this. My dying patient feels very happy to think the cabin won't be going empty during the summer holidays. My shoulders slumped, and a heavy ache seemed to tug at my heart, because of the idea of a holiday in a cabin. Well, it certainly didn't get better than that. I knew that my husband would refuse Julie Holland's kind offer, because work was far too important for him. Besides anything else, he wouldn't be remotely enamoured if I took the kids off to the cabin on my own, and abandoned him, as he liked me being at the house running the show, even when I sent the kids off to holiday camp, or to stay with a relative, that is, like their Aunt Eleanor. It's such a generous offer, Julie, I said tentatively, and it's so kind of you to think of us. But I'm not sure we can accept your offer. I'm quite sure Walter will be too busy to agree to this." At this, Julie raised a brow. "Good Lord! Why on earth would you say that, Amy? This is the quintessential opportunity for you to get away. I know money isn't an issue for you and your family, but I mean, this is just a gift horse, isn't it? And I can see that your husband Walter needs a jolly good break. How about I have a word with him for you?" "You can try if you like," I said sceptically, "but I'd put money on the fact that Walter will refuse you, Julie. He spends his life working in that office of his, and I think the last thing on his mind would be going on holiday. If you can persuade him to take me and the kids away, I will quite literally eat my hat," I told Julie Holland, very frankly. "Well, my dear, I hope your hat is jolly tasty, because you're about to eat it," Julie Holland teased, slapping me gently on the back. She followed me up the footpath to our house, and I told her to sit on the sofa in the living room, while I went to call my husband for her. I knocked on the door of my husband's study, and a booming voice said, "Who is it?" "Sorry to disturb you, sweetheart. It's Julie Holland. You know, our neighbour from 2 doors down. She says she'd like a word with you. She told me she ran into you the other day about 2 days back. She's in the living room right now. She says it's important." To my surprise, the door of the study flew wide open, and my husband came out of his office and sashayed into the living room, his face lighting up when he saw Julie Holland. His positive reaction to seeing this neighbour of ours in my home threw me for 6, for I hadn't seen Walter look this enamoured before. "Hello, Walter," said Julie brightly, almost purring like a contented Cheshire cat. "I've organised for you and the kids, and your wife, of course, to stay at a cabin on the border of Canada, well, close to the border of Canada, completely free of charge. How say you on that? It would be great for you and your family to get away to spend some meaningful time together, just like we discussed the other day." I thought I was going to keel over from shock and faint, when Walter said, "That sounds very lovely, Julie. Thanks for this. We'll definitely take you up on this offer of yours. I personally wouldn't miss it for the world. Would you, Amy?" he said, turning around to meet my gaze. "Well, of course not," I said. "Thank you so much, Julie, for this." "No need to thank me," said Julie. "I'm glad I could have been of help, because your family definitely needs a holiday. And there's also a hat that needs to be eaten. I think I'll show myself out." "What was all that about?" Walter asked me. "What did she mean, there's a hat that needs to be eaten?" "Oh, don't worry about that, Walter. It was nothing," I said. When I was a little girl, Cinderella was my all-time favourite story. I simply loved how the fairy godmother interceded on her part so that she could go to the illustrious ball and meet a handsome prince. Julie Holland had become that fairy godmother to me, organising a beautiful family holiday for us that might never have transpired without her kind intervention. Little did I know that on this fabulous family holiday, I'd get the man I initially married back, because he would begin to realise that family matters so much more than all the money in the entire world. Morgan. I couldn't believe we were going on holiday with our parents. Normally when the summer holidays beckoned, so would my dread, as my mother would invariably send us both away to stay with relatives or at summer camp. But now we were going to a place on the border of Canada, or close to the border, to stay at a cabin called the Prt3of4. When my parents told me and my sister Primrose the good news over dinner that night, the first thought that entered my head is what had happened to my father. Had he had a laparotomy, or a brain transplant perhaps? Why was he suddenly showing a keen interest in us? For a brief moment I wondered if he'd been diagnosed with a life-threatening illness like cancer, and had only weeks possibly left to live, and by some miracle he tossed his work to one side and tried to focus his undivided attention on his family instead. But I could see my father didn't exactly look sick. Not that he was in the best of health, of course, because he always looked pale, for he never spent any time in the sun, and he never exercised. Don't get me wrong. I love my father, but more often than not, he's hardly ever been involved in our lives. My father is a very busy man. He spends his life either in town at the huge building of glass, where he has an office on the 63rd floor. His office is something else, let me tell you. I remember when I visited it for the very first time. I thought my father had to be an extremely important man. I found out that yes, he was a very big deal. His office was absolutely spectacular. In truth, I'd never seen anything like it before. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Seattle skyline, along with great views over the Space Needle. He had secretaries and subordinates alike, bowing to his every request, as if my father was some kind of demigod that they practically worshipped. When I saw the way people reacted towards my father, I realized my father was a very high-profile man. But believe it or not, I never wanted to be like him, because as far as I was concerned, he has absolutely no fun in his life. It's like everything in his life is primarily focused on work, and that's got to be murderously boring. My mother says our father loves us very much, even though we don't see him that often. She says he works so hard because he wants to give us the best opportunities in life, like paying for our private school education. But as great as that may be, I've always believed he could spend more time with us. When my father isn't working at his fancy office in Seattle, he'll lock himself away in the office at home, where he handles very important conference calls, and spends his life pinned to the computer. He has a sign on his closed door which reads, "Do not disturb," written in a threatening bright red print, which makes you almost scared to venture close to the door. When we return home from school, me and my sister Primrose have to be as quiet as two church mouse, because otherwise we will hear my father's booming voice shouting out, "Kids, be quiet, will you? I'm on an important conference call." When my mother sat at the dinner table that night, she seemed to be wringing her hands excitedly, and there was a bright sparkle in her eyes I hadn't seen before. She seemed really happy, deliriously so, and that got me a little worried, as I knew something was up. She said to us, "Me and your father have something very exciting to tell you, kids." When my mother said that, my heart did a somersault. My innards began to churn. My first thought was, please God, she's not going to announce she's pregnant, and I'll be having a new brother or sister in 9 months' time, who'll be 13 years younger than I am. The words came out of my mouth in a tumble. "You're not pregnant, are you, Mum?" My mother's eyes widened. She looked quite taken aback. She said, "Good Lord, Morgan, where did you get that bizarre idea from? Of course I'm not pregnant. I don't intend to have any more children, if you must know. Much as I adore you kids, you are my world, and you two are more than enough for me." Me and my sister Primrose, who is about 4 years younger than me, quickly exchanged secret looks together. We're very close, and I knew almost at once that she thought my mother was about to announce she was pregnant as well. We were both heartily relieved that that was not the case, for another sister or brother would create upheaval in our lives that none of us would lightly want. Our secret exchange confirmed the fact that we were both very thankful that Mum was not pregnant. "I've got great news for the both of you," my mother repeated herself. "But it's about the school holidays that are coming up in due course in a few weeks' time." I drew in a deep breath. Please God, they weren't going to be sending Primrose and me off to summer camp again, or worse still, to stay with Aunt Eleanor, who is deaf in one ear, and you have to practically shout at her for her to understand what on earth you're saying. The last time me and my sister returned home from Aunt Eleanor's, who lives in Denver, Colorado, me and my sister returned home with dry, scratchy throats and hoarse voices, because we'd been shouting all the time, and it had taken a large toll on us. My mother thought we had laryngitis, because our voices were hoarse from shouting so much. Aunt Eleanor is a good woman, of course, but being with someone hard of hearing can be tough at the very best of times. My mother paused for a moment, and then she said, "Julie Holland, that lovely lady from 2 doors down. You know, the one that has the 2 Pekingeses. Delightful they are. Has offered us a perfectly delightful cabin that is normally booked up 2 years in advance. The cabin is called the Treneries. It's close to the border of Canada, and we're going to go there as a family for the first 3 weeks of the summer holidays. And before you ask, yes, your father is coming along as well." At this point, me and my sister Primrose were gawking at my father. We couldn't believe that our dad had agreed to come on a holiday with us. I was sure I had to have misheard my mother. This couldn't possibly be right. My father was never involved directly in our lives. And the last time we'd been on holiday together as a family was when I was 3 years old. And although I don't remember that, of course, I have seen photographic evidence of me on the beach with a bucket and spade, building sandcastles with my father. So I can confirm that at some point my father did actually accompany us on holidays.
"Good Lord, Morgan," my father said. "Don't look so surprised. Of course I'm coming on holiday with all of you. I should have been on many more holidays with all of you. If I could change things, I surely would. I wish I'd done things differently. But from now on, I'm going to be a present father in your lives. Julie Holland has given me what I can only describe as a rude awakening, and made me see the error of my ways. And there's going to be big changes in this house from now on."
At that point, my mother and Dad took each other's hands, and they looked at each other adoringly. I wanted to shout out, "Get a room, will you?" In truth, I couldn't believe my father was saying all this. And my mother, well, she looked like a besotted puppy dog that couldn't get enough of its new owner. She had come alive, and even my father's face didn't look so pallid as it normally did. What was going on, I wondered? Where did all this happiness come from? Had I stepped into a stranger's home, perhaps? I knew who Julie Holland was, of course I did. She was one of those people that everybody loves. She was a neighbour from 2 doors down, who walked her Pekinese, Poncho and Lamondi, twice a day. Me and my sister Primrose loved dogs, and had begged our father to get us a pet. But he always point-blank refused. So when we saw Julie Holland walking her dogs, we would rush over to fuss over them. She'd ask us how we were, and tell us about the people in hospice that her dogs had befriended. Never in a million years did I believe someone like Julie Holland had given my father's personality a brand new wardrobe to reinvent himself. In truth, I barely recognised my father's sitting opposite me at the table. It was like Julie Holland had given my father's personality a brand new wardrobe to wear. In truth, I barely recognised the man sitting opposite me at the table. It was like he was new again. And that evening he asked me and Primrose about school, expressing a keen and eager interest in attending sports games and parents' evenings from now on. I would have thought this was a wind-up, but I could see by my dad's expression it was serious enough, that he meant every word of it. And I was flummoxed by this turnaround in my father. Could people really decide to change like this, I wondered? I was reminded of my friend Russell at school, whose mother kicked her husband out of the house for becoming a drunkard, when he was about 2 years old. When Russell was 5, his dad suddenly got his act together with Alcoholics Anonymous, and now his father and mother are happily married again and living together as a family, and the man has been sober for many years now.
"I know what you're thinking, Morgan, love,"
my mother chuckled, clasping my father's hand so tightly in hers, as if she didn't want this new version of him to go away.
"Your father has been thinking a lot, haven't you, dear?" she said to my dad. "I have indeed," said my father solemnly. "I've taken a long, hard look at myself, and to be honest, I actually loathe what I see. I realise that I've isolated myself from all of you. I've got so caught up and embroiled in my work, I've neglected what matters most of all. But things are going to change around here from now on, and I fully intend to spend a lot more time with you all."
I wasn't sure if I believed my father on this one. I mean, does a leopard ever change its spots? Is a man so set in his ways capable of change? But then I thought about Russell's father again. I wasn't sure if Dad could metamorphosize into an ideal father, but I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt anyway. But I did hope my father would become like some of my friends' fathers at school, actively involved in my life. If that happened, it would be incredibly cool. "So we're not going to be staying with Aunt Eleanor then?" asked my sister Primrose earnestly. "It's just that last time we stayed with her, we practically lost our voices. We could barely talk for 2 weeks afterwards."
"No, Primrose, the good news is you will not be staying with Aunt Eleanor again," my father reassured her. "From now on, we're going to spend the holidays together as a family, the way we should have done a long time ago. I can think of a great deal of interesting places to visit, but it starts with our little break to the Treneries, thanks to the goodness of Julie Holland. We are very lucky to have such a considerate neighbour like her."
When dinner was over, my sister Primrose discreetly took me to one side and with wide earnest eyes she said, "Did that just happen, Morgan? Or am I dreaming? Mum and Dad are all over each other, like a couple of besotted teenage lovers. Mum's giggling all the time like a silly schoolgirl. Dad's eyes are shining so bright. And now we're going on a holiday together as a family, and Dad wants to be more actively involved in our lives. Please tell me I'm not dreaming. Because if I'm not, I really don't want to wake up." I pinched my sister so hard that she winced in pain. "What did you do that for, Morgan? That really hurt," she hissed at me. "You wanted to make sure you weren't dreaming," I chuckled. It was hard to believe we were all seated in my father's Range Rover to go to the Treneries a few weeks later, which my father surmised was about 4 hours away from home. "It takes 3 hours to get to the Canadian border," he had said. "We're going to a remote area in North America, very close to Canada." But finding our way to the Treneries did not take the 4 hours my father had anticipated. It must have been at least 6, probably more, but I was so caught up in the fabulous scenery, and our family being together, singing songs to the radio, and enjoying this quintessential moment of family intimacy, that I lost all track of time. For this special time of being cocooned together was marvellous, and I couldn't remember a time when I felt more animated. The energy in my father's Range Rover was alive, with infinite possibility, so much so that I could barely contain my excitement. My father kept squeezing my mother's hands, as if he would never get enough of the woman that he had so often ignored. He kept turning around to look at us on the back seat and asking us how we were doing. "We're almost there," said my father. "It shan't be long now." I glanced out of the windows at the arresting scenery that was so diverse, but we were now in an area where the sculptural mountains ruled the show, stealing it unabashedly with a majesty that could not be hidden, even behind a heavy curtain of white smouldering mist that was utterly magnificent and so ethereal. So much so I held my breath. The sky was blue. There were meadows full of wild flowers, pretty lakes that glistened like silver in the morning sun, and so many tall, lofty, spectacular-looking trees. We had been driving down a rocky dirt road in a heavily wooded area, where trees fringed the edges of both sides and stretched out for an eternity. My father's GPS announced that when we took the next turning to the right, we would be at our due destination. But my father had driven too far forward, so he had to back his car. At this point I had my nose pinned to the window, and I smudged the glass pane with it. And that was when I saw him. It all happened remarkably quickly, but I knew I wasn't imagining things. At first I thought I'd been looking at a strange-looking tree. It was in a funny shape, I thought, and unlike the other trees, appeared to be missing its crowning glory of rich leaves. I was thinking how strange the tree was, and it rather reminded me of a very large man with gargantuan shoulders. But as I focused on it more intently, my eyes grew as round as saucers. It couldn't be, surely. There was no way. But standing there larger than life by a tree, close to the windy dirt road, where there was a signpost and an arrow, marked the Treneries, I saw a Bigfoot. For a moment my eyes met his. There was something so kind and spiritual about those dark treacle-coloured eyes that I didn't feel any fear as you might expect I would. Instead, I felt intrigued, curious and incredibly excited as I looked at this Bigfoot, who stood up at about 9 to 10 foot tall from the ground. He was built for power like a rhino. I was so taken aback by what I was seeing, I was beginning to wonder if I had to be hallucinating, because this couldn't be real. No, it couldn't be real. There was no way. And then the next thing that happened, I heard a chuckle in my head. But it wasn't me that was chuckling, along with a voice which was not my inner voice, a voice that I didn't recognize. "Yes, I'm real, and good day to you," it said. And then the Bigfoot just vanished like a wisp of smoke, and I genuinely thought that I was going mad. Had the Bigfoot just spoken to me? Or was this in my imagination? But that voice did not come from me. "Ah, we're here," said my father, turning the Range Rover down the long, windy dirt road through the trees. "Dad! Mum! Did you see that?" I asked. See what, love? Asked my mother, turning round from the passenger side seat to look at me, as if she didn't have a clue what on earth I was talking about. I realised then and there that I was the only one that had been privy to seeing the Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot had spoken to me. Yes, I'm real. Have a good day. But if I told my parents that, they'd think I was making up fairy tales. But I know what I saw. The Bigfoot was real, and did speak to me. I was bursting with an ebullient desire to tell everyone what I'd seen, but something inside me warned me against it. It was advising me to tread with caution. Oh, nothing, I said vaguely, deciding that it would be the best if I didn't tell them what I thought I'd seen. They probably wouldn't believe a word of it. So I decided to keep the matter to myself, and they'd said very nonchalantly, "This is Bigfoot country, isn't it, Dad?" My mother and father exchanged secret looks together as if to say, "Did you hear that? Morgan believes in Bigfoot." I felt almost as if they were ridiculing this very idea, as if I was a stupid kid that still believed in Father Christmas. I felt a tug of annoyance in my heart, as my mother was being so patronising. Why do parents sometimes think they know it all, when they so obviously don't know everything? But when they become adults, they seem to have this insane, preposterous idea that they have life so perfectly figured out. But I've gathered this. They don't. "Well, I suppose it would be perfect Bigfoot country," my mother said with a smile. "But I'm sure you well know, Morgan, that Bigfoots are not real." "I believe in them," said Primrose suddenly. "I've been watching a programme called Finding Bigfoot. People have seen Bigfoots before. I'm telling you, Mum, there are so many encounters people have had all over North America and Canada. Morgan is right. I think this is perfect Bigfoot territory, with the lakes, the woods, the indigenous wildlife. It would be an idyllic habitat for them." My mother turned to look directly at my sister, over the passenger side seat. She looked almost sorry for my sister, as if she was being so desperately naive, so ridiculously foolish. "Look, love, you mustn't believe everything you watch on the television. People love to make stuff up, you know. And yes, it does make life rather riveting to think that something like that might exist. But I'm sorry to say, sweetheart, there is no evidence for such a thing as Bigfoot." "But how do you know?" said Primrose indignantly. "You weren't there when these people had those encounters. They know what they saw, and I know they weren't lying." "Sweetheart," my mother said rather patronisingly, "you're 8 years old. You're far too grown up to believe in all this nonsense. If people claim to have seen a Bigfoot, they're just making it up to get attention. Some people will do anything for their moment of fame. Either that or they misidentified what they thought they saw, which can easily happen. But no, I'm afraid to tell you Bigfoots do not exist." "Yes, they do," I said internally. "How do I know?" "Because I've seen one." My father cocked his head to look at us. "Your mother's absolutely right, love. Bigfoots are not real." It was as my father turned his vehicle down the long, windy dirt road that rattled as we drove down it, that I resolved to tell my sister what I'd seen, as unlike my dismissive parents, I knew Primrose would believe my story. When we drew up to the cabin, which was set on an open piece of prairie, which was rocky and wild, with flowers and tufts of grass that burst through the ground, and bordering the prairie were extensive wood groves of trees. In the distance I could see the smouldering silhouettes of the mountains, dominating the skyline with their pomp and ceremony. The cabin was charming, far better than I could have ever envisaged in my wildest imaginings. It looked exactly like a Swiss chalet, made out of that distinctive yellow polished-looking wood. It had large floor-to-ceiling windows, 2 floors and a beautiful balcony that overlooked the magnificent views for miles around. I knew at first sight that I was going to thoroughly enjoy staying here. "Oh, what a magnificent, delightful-looking cabin!" said my mother rather dreamily, as she stared out of the windscreen window to take in the views. "This place must have cost a fortune to rent. It was so incredibly kind of Julie Holland to allow us to stay here, thanks to that dying patient of hers. that she visits at the hospice with her dogs. I never expected anything as magnificent as this. The interiors were even better than I could have imagined. I charged eagerly up the staircase, with 2 legs at a time, as fast as I possibly could, to find the best-looking room for myself, with the most fabulous views. It was the first 3 days spent at the cabin. For some irrational reason I hadn't got around to mentioning to my sister that I'd actually seen a Bigfoot on our arrival here, for the time never seemed right to me. Our family began enjoying themselves so very much. It felt as if we had become extremely close just over a few days. My father never worked for a single second, and had taken us both fishing at a nearby lake, so things had been extremely good for all of us. My mother and father seemed to have fallen in love with each other all over again, and my dad was even talking about having a second wedding where they could reaffirm their wedding vows to each other. If things continued like this for our family, where our dad became actively involved in our lives, we would become closer than ever, I was most sure. That was, of course, if my father didn't return to the old habits of a lifetime. But there was such a dramatic shift in his personality, and I'd noticed a light in his eyes that had never been there before, that made me seriously doubt that he'd ever return to his old ways, rather like a butterfly that refuses to become a caterpillar again, once its lens on the world has completely shifted. My parents both actively encouraged us to explore the countryside to our heart's content, and there were a couple of mountain bikes available for us to use in the shed. One day, as Primrose and I were cycling down a path through the trees, we came upon a magnificent silvery stream, where charging white water rushed through the woods as if it was in a tearing hurry to get to its due destination, rather like a city-bound train. The stream was absolutely mesmerizing, for it sparkled with a twinkling light that was reflected across the water, and some parts were so crystal clear you could actually see fish darting around in it. There was also a beautiful waterfall of white foaming water that discharged itself across the rocks. I couldn't help but feel the stream was inviting us to take a dip. Primrose and I climbed off our bikes, and then we parked them against a couple of tall, lofty trees that overlooked the water. We took off our shoes and socks and ran over to the stream and paddled in the water, laughing out loud every time we tried to catch a fish that skillfully managed to elude us. How long we played there in the stream, I have no idea. But when we finally dragged ourselves out of the water, we began to search for our bicycles, but they were all but gone. Where had they got to? We knew exactly where we'd propped them up. We couldn't find them anywhere, and that was when I observed a long line of pebbles, which I followed, and lo and behold, when the pebbles finally came to a stop, we found ourselves at a tree, and when I looked up into the branches, there were our bicycles hanging upside down like a pair of disfigured Christmas decorations. Thankfully, I managed to climb up the tree and succeeded in passing down the bicycles to my sister. As I did this, I heard a chuckle, as if something or someone was having a good old laugh at our expense, as whoever was laughing at us was clearly responsible for putting our bicycles up in the tree like this. I wasn't remotely amused by any of this, because the bicycles had been hanging upside down, and I didn't think it was remotely funny. My thought was, who could have done this? I knew there were other cabins in the area, all owned by the man who had let us use the treneries. Had someone staying at a nearby cabin been playing a joke on us, I wondered? If they had, they would soon realize they'd pulled a stunt on the wrong people, for I would get back at them for their silly prank that they had played on the both of us. So there we are, that is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until then, goodbye and good night.